Hello everyone, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, host of Reformed GGA and also the Relationship and Truth YouTube channel for those of you who check that out. This will hopefully be a relatively quick YouTube video covering two very interesting guns, the Ruger LCP and the Bersa 380. Now, for those of you who know me, you know that I'm not a huge 380 fan, and the reason for that is just simply the cost of the round. I like my guns to have relatively inexpensive ammunition, and 380 unfortunately is not a super inexpensive round, especially in a bang for your buck kind of sense. It's a relatively small round, not overly powerful, and yet it can be as expensive as some of the larger rounds. And so when it comes to centerfire rounds, I typically go with 9mm because it's much more cost effective. It's a bit more powerful. It's actually considerably more powerful. It's a higher pressure round compared to the 380. I think if I remember right, it's about 50% higher chamber pressure. And so even though the two diameters between 380 and 9mm is the same, you can actually load 380 bullets into 9mm shells and it will work just fine. Little lie, and it might not operate the slide on the gun very well, but as far as firing out of the gun, it's the same. It won't do anything to the barrel or anything like that. It's the same diameter, but 9mm does have a higher chamber pressure. And at the same time, it's a cheaper round, and so that's what I usually go with. As far as function is concerned, I actually don't mind 380. The idea of something with a little bit less recoil and those kinds of things, I don't necessarily mind that at all. It's just that such an expensive round that I've just never really thought of it as being a good round for myself. But that being said, I know lots of people who do carry 380 and have shown interest in 380. And the reason why I'm actually making this video is because a while back one of my friends asked me for my opinion on two 380 handguns. And I'm going to be showing them over here on the right hand side of the screen here. This is just off of Sportsman's warehouse, and I'm doing that because I don't actually own either of these handguns. I've dealt with both of them, handled both of them, shot both of them, etc., etc., but I don't own either of them because, like I said, I don't shoot 380 for myself. I never buy 380 ammunition. I don't have any of my own guns that shoot 380, and so it's experience with other people's guns. People that I know fairly well, and I've had the chance to use their stuff on multiple occasions, and those kinds of things. The two guns that he asked me about are the Ruger LCP. That's what I have here. This is the old model. They have the Ruger LCP 2 out now that they changed a few things on, but I'm not overly familiar with the LCP 2, so I'll just do the LCP 1. And then he also asked me about the Bersa. And the Bersas have a few different names. This is the Firestorm, which is the old version of the Bersa. Now they have the Thunder, which is, when you're talking about the 380, it's still basically the same thing. So we'll talk about that. All right, so those are the two guns that we're going to be comparing in 380. And first, we'll just talk a run through some of the basic stats. As to the LCP, as far as its between the two, it is easily the smaller one. You'll notice that it only comes in at around 10 ounces. I'm not sure how well you guys can see that here. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit for you guys. Yep. Well, that's probably in way too far. Okay, let's see if we can do it that way. There we go. All right. So as far as basic statistics, it has a capacity of 6+1, meaning 6 in the magazine, and if you want, you can load an extra 1 into the chamber and then top off. Barrel length is 2 3/4 inches. And then the overall weight is about 10 ounces for the old model of LCP. For the Bersa Thunder, it's a pretty different animal. Let's see if I can find the specifications here. Alright, so it by comparison has a standard capacity of 7+1. Now they do make magazines for the Bersa that are 8+1, and then there's also a model of the Bersa. It's not a standard model, but they make a model of the Bersa that's called the Thunder Plus, which actually has a 15-round magazine, and we're going to circle back around to that fact here in a little bit. But if you're talking about the basic factory mags, 7+1, and like I said, they do make aftermarket magazines that are 8+1. The barrel length is 3.5 inches, and so you gain 3/4 of an inch there. Weight is about double. It's about a 20-ounce gun, unloaded, of course. Both of these stats are unloaded. So overall, the Bersa Thunder, which we have here, is definitely the heavier gun. In standard configuration, it does have a higher capacity, but not by much, by 1 or 2 rounds. So very similar as far as rounds capacity go, but the big difference is going to be size and weight. The LCP is a very small, very trim handgun. The Bersa Thunder, not quite as much. And so my friend was asking, you know, what do I think about the two guns? And it really depends on what you're wanting to do with them. When you're talking about the Ruger LCP, when I think of this gun, I think of how much I hate it, to be honest. Because there's lots of things about the gun that I do not like. And just using the picture that's available here, one of the things that I do not like about it is the fact that the sights on it are so incredibly small. The sights that it have on it, you can see the little dimples there. The sights that it have on it are basically one piece with the slide, and it doesn't show you the back profile here, but the cuts, the actual sights themselves are actually fairly wide. The back sight is actually almost as wide as the slide itself is, at least at the top. And depending on the color of gun that you get, because they make the Ruger LCP in quite a few different colors, depending on the color of gun that you get, will vastly determine what color those sights are, because they're usually just going to be whatever that slide is. And so if the slide is black, the sights are black. If the gun is tan, usually, or at least if the slide is tan, usually the sights are tan. And depending on what you're shooting, it's very easy to lose those sights in comparison to what you're shooting. So for me, I go shooting out in the desert all the time. And someone that I know happens to have one of these Ruger LCPs, and I've shot his on multiple occasions, and I hate using the sights on these things because they're really small sights to begin with. On a very short gun, the barrel length from the back of the chamber to the front is only 2 3/4 inches, and what's behind that isn't all that big in the first place. So you have a very short sight radius, and you have very low profile, very blocky sights, and then to boot, his gun is tan, and we're shooting out in the desert where everything is basically brown and sandy. So you have a tan gun against a tan background for most things. It is really hard to pick up the sights effectively. And just because of the sights, not necessarily the capacity, the capability of the gun itself and the barrel, but just because of the sights, it is really hard for me to get accurate shots. For me, anything beyond 5 yards is pretty good with it. But even for people who have an easier time picking up sights than I do, because as you can see from the glasses, I have vision problems, and they do affect me when I shoot, and so I'm more restrained than other people are in that regard. But even people who have fairly good eyesight who use that gun under those conditions, tan gun, tan background, oftentimes light colored targets, so on and so forth. Their accuracy isn't great. They might be better than mine, which doesn't take a whole lot to beat, but their accuracy isn't great. And for me, very, very restricted. Like I said, past 5 yards, I don't really feel confident making super accurate hits. Beyond that, could I hit a human-sized target? Probably. At least wing them, or if nothing else. But as far as being able to place a shot where I want to place the shot and hopefully end a violent encounter quickly, not so much. If I were to use an LCP defensively, it would only be relatively close quarters, because that's about the only place where I could personally get an accurate shot off. So I don't like that about the gun. Okay, so I don't like that fact. Another thing with the first generation LCPs, I don't know if they've changed this in later LCPs, but in first generation LCPs, the slide does not lock back. So you fire, 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 and once the last round goes off, you keep pulling the trigger and nothing happens. The slide isn't locked back, so that visual cue that's there with a lot of guns isn't there with the LCP. It's just the trigger doesn't work. And then if you happen to be in a situation where you need to rely on a backup magazine, the threat has not abated with the first magazine and you need to rely on the second magazine. And when you're talking about a round count that's only 6 rounds, there's a reasonable chance, it might not happen super often, but there is a reasonable chance that you will need a second magazine. And so, of course, you're going to need to load the second magazine. And it's a very, very small gun by comparison, especially by comparison to the Bersa. Like I said, the Bersa is about twice the weight there, and there is a size difference as well. That has a longer barrel, about a 3.5-inch barrel, and the overall dimensions of everything you're dealing with the Bersa are just going to be bigger. With the LCP, when it comes to manipulating the gun, you've got this itty-bitty tiny little thing, and the slide, like I said, the slide doesn't lock back. So when you're manipulating it, there's more manipulation that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to get the old slide out, and getting a hold of that slide, that magazine release on such a small gun is a problem in the first place. Frankly, to be honest, it's a little bit hard to do even on the Bersa, but the Bersa is a bigger gun, so it's easier. But you go to something as small as the Ruger LCP, and hitting that magazine release effectively can be a bit of a problem. So you have to hit the magazine release, get the new magazine in the gun, and because the slide doesn't hold back, you can't just simply drop the magazine. You've got to do a full rack on it, and it's a very small gun. So you've got a lot of relatively small manipulations that you have to do, and because the slide doesn't lock back, you're going to have to do the extra step of doing a full rack on the slide instead of just dropping it like you can do with some guns. Now, when it comes to the Bersa, let's see if I can bring it up here. The Bersa does actually have a proper slide release, and so if you are a right-handed person, once you've got the magazine in there, you can hit that slide release with your thumb, and you're ready to go. So as far as being able to get back in action after expending your first magazine, it's going to be a little bit better. And then also you'll notice the difference in the sights. LCP sights, tiny, tiny, tiny little things. On the Bersa, though, the sights actually stand out a little bit more. They're not usually huge, but as long as you get a regular Bersa 380, and I'm not talking about their special concealed carry edition where they basically take off the sides, they reduce them to stupid little nubs, which is a terrible thing to do in a concealed carry gun as far as I'm concerned. Oh, they say, oh, it's concealed carry. What they really mean is we took the sights off and reduced them down to something that's practically useless. Okay, I know why they do that. They don't want it to snag on stuff, etc., etc. But the thing that you would need most on a concealed carry gun are the sights. That is not what makes a gun concealed carry or not. It shouldn't be what makes a gun concealed carry or not. You want to still have good, decent sights on your concealed carry handgun. And fortunately, most of the Bersas have pretty decent sights on them. And you can get off fairly accurate shots because they have decent sights that actually work relatively well. And a lot of them have a 3-dot system on them. And even if the dots aren't the color you like or whatnot, even the post system because it's the dots on posts. Even the post system that they have is usually pretty good and fairly distinct. And so getting accurate shots off with a Bersa, even at a fairly great range, is not overly difficult. The Bersa, is, with a little bit of practice, is easily a 20-yard gun, and for a gun that small, that's pretty decent. Personally, for me, that's definitely a difficult shot, but there's lots of people that I've known who can effectively hit very small targets at 20 yards with a Bersa. It doesn't take a whole lot of doing. It's a relatively accurate gun, and a lot of it, for most people, the difference is the sights. It has a decent set of sights on it by comparison to the LCP. LCP has these itty-bitty little nubs, and they advertise them as being this great thing for concealed carry because they don't hang up on things, which is true, but you also can't use them to see, which is kind of the purpose of having sights. And so the Bersa definitely wins in that regard. Like I said, there's also the issue of the slide not locking back on the LCP, at least the old model. I don't know anything about the new one in that regard, but on the Bersa, the slide does lock back, has a proper slide release, and so that's just one less manipulation, a little bit faster of getting the gun back into action. And we already discussed the difference in round counts. The Bersa usually does have a little bit more rounds in the standard configuration, 1 or 2 more rounds. Excuse me. The Bersa, like I said, usually does have 1 or 2 more rounds that it carries than the LCP. Another thing that is important to note is the difference in trigger pulls. The first generation LCP, I don't know if they've changed this in the second generation, but the first generation LCP, what they did is they basically made a double action only gun out of it. So it has a fairly heavy trigger and it's a fairly long trigger pull. Now I run double action guns all the time, and so it doesn't mess with me too much, but just because the gun is so small and how my particular hand fits on the handle of the gun, it winds up being kind of a weird arc that I have to pull my finger through, and it feels like it's almost a full quarter of a turn before I actually get to the point where the shot breaks. That might be just my mileage. Your mileage may vary, but to me, the trigger pull on the Ruger LCP is very, very, very awkward. I'm used to heavy trigger pulls. That part is okay, but the angle of the trigger and the kind of travel that you go through just seems to me to be very, very, very odd. By comparison, the Bersa is much more conventional in terms of hammer-fired guns. It has an external hammer, and it is such that you can drop the hammer if you want to. The safety that is on the side functions as a hammer drop as well, so you can pull the safety down, and it'll drop the hammer, put the safety back up, and you still have a gun with the hammer down on it. You've basically a decocking mechanism is what it doubles as. And lots of people who carry the Bersa carry it in that configuration. They won't put the safety on. They'll just hit the safety once to drop the hammer, and then they'll take the safety back off. And that hammer being down means you're in double action mode, and so the first trigger pull is fairly heavy. If you want a lighter, crisper trigger pull, you pull the hammer all the way back, and you can usually just thumb it, and you get a lighter trigger pull. And I haven't spent a ton of time playing with the trigger, trying to figure out exactly where the break points are for each. But as I remember it felt like it was roughly maybe an 8 to 9 pound trigger pull when the hammer was forward, and probably a 4.5 to 5.5 pound trigger pull when the hammer was back, which is fairly typical for a lot of guns, especially double the single action guns. So fairly normal in that, and just because the overall shape of the gun is more conventional, it puts my hand in a better spot so that when I'm pulling the trigger, it doesn't feel like I'm making this weird kind of curving motion that I do on the LCP. It's a little bit straighter, a little bit flatter, a little bit more conventional, more normal for me. And so all of those things being the case, I do like that more. I do enjoy that more. It makes more sense to me to do everything that way. I like it when everything is feels normal, and the Bersa definitely feels more normal than the Ruger LCP does. So when I'm looking at the guns offhand, I just automatically hate the LCP. It is very hard to get accurate shots off with it, and manipulating it in the moment is very difficult just because it's such a small gun. And then both of these guns technically have break-in periods, and a lot of 380s do. It's one of the things about how 380s run in general. A lot of times they'll put it in blowback action guns, and the Bersa is a blowback action gun. The Ruger, I don't know if it's actually technically blowback action. I think it actually might be some kind of lock breech system. And just looking at where the barrel sits relative to the slide, it seems like it would be some kind of lock breech design, some variant on that. But when you're dealing with something that's either very compact like the LCP, or a lot of times with blowback guns, you will have a bit of a break-in period. And I've heard some people say that the break-in period for the LCP is only 75 rounds, only 50 rounds, something like that. I personally wouldn't trust that number. The person that I happen to know who owns an LCP had issues with his LCP for quite a while into it. I would suggest that a better break-in number is probably closer to 150, maybe 200 rounds. And frankly, the same thing with the Bersa. Now, the other friend of mine who actually has a Bersa, and I actually wound up finding it for him. He just simply wanted a handgun at the time, and the Bersa was basically the first thing that I found that was in the right price category, and the right price category being free because somebody was getting rid of it. Made that easy. No hiccups with it, and the person who had it before my friend did never even fired it. They just got it not really realizing exactly what it was and figured it wasn't for them. And so my friend wound up getting it basically brand new, never been fired, and so far it hasn't hiccuped for him at all. But I would still feel better, at least putting 200 rounds through it before I wanted to bet my life on it, That's more of just a personal thing. But so far, in my experience with the people that I know, with the guns that I know, the Bersa has less of a break-in period and less issues with break-in than does the Ruger LCP. And so far in this, it's probably sounding like I am a much bigger fan of the Bersa. And that actually would be incorrect. There are lots of things that are wrong with the Ruger LCP. I don't want you to misunderstand me on that. I don't like the Ruger LCP. But there is one area that usually winds up trumping everything else when it comes to getting either of these two firearms that I think is worth talking about, for sure. Okay. And now that I've changed the size of the screen here, you might think that I'm going to talk about the cost. And it is usually true that the Ruger is cheaper than the Bersa, but that's not the major reason, the major factor. The major factor is this. Most people who buy 380s intentionally, there's people like my one friend who wound up getting the handgun because it was the right price, it was free, and so you get what you can take, and beggars can't be choosers and all that sort of thing. And so there's people who are like that for sure, but most people who go out and buy a 380 intentionally, who are specifically looking for a gun, they're looking for something that they can concealed carry easily, and something that they're going to have on them when they might not want to have something else. And that is usually the biggest consideration for why you would want the LCP over the Bersa. And that is it. It is size and weight compliant, whereas the Bersa, frankly, is not. The Bersa is a small gun, all things considered, but it is not really that small of a gun. Yes, you can technically fit it into a pants pocket, but it's still going to be kind of bulky in there. It's it's not exactly going to be inobtrusive, I'll put it that way. It is a small gun, but it's not so small as to be easily carryable. It's something that you're still probably going to want to have a proper holster for in some way, shape, or form. Yes, it is technically something you could fit in most pants pockets, at least for guys. Women, it's a little bit different story because their pants are made differently. Always felt sorry for them in that regard because some of the pockets on women's pants just terrible. But fashion choices aside, it is kind of a pocket gun, but not really. And whenever I've seen people who carry, and I ask them what they carry, if I know them well enough and I know that they carry and we have a kind of relationship where we can ask each other, ask them what they're carrying, and I have seen a lot of people carry the LCP who own it, but I have yet to see anyone who actually owned a Bersa. Well, take that back. There are people that I know of who own Bersas and have carried them, but that comes with the caveat that it's have carried them. The vast majority of time when I meet people who have carried a Bersa, it's in the past tense. I used to carry a Bersa, now I carry something else. And it's just simply because of the bulk of the gun. It is about twice the weight of the LCP, and physically it is a bigger gun, and so it is just harder to carry. And that's what most people want a 380 for. They want something that they're going to have on them when they don't want to worry about having something that's big and bulky and all those kinds of things. For example, there's one fellow that I know who absolutely loves 45s, and he will probably love 45s until the day he dies. But the vast majority of the time that he's carrying, he's not carrying his 45s. The vast majority of time that he's carrying, he has a little Ruger LCP on him. Why? Because it is just so much more convenient to carry. It's something that's small enough that you can put into an ankle holster if you want to. Not that an ankle holster is a great way to go, but it beats not carrying at all. It's small enough that you can conceivably throw it into your back pocket of your pants for a quick trip into town to buy a gallon of milk or whatever it happens to be. It is just a small, convenient gun, and so the vast majority of time, that is what a lot of people carry. And like I said, this one gentleman, as much as he likes 45, and I know he likes 45 because he makes fun of my 9mm all the time, but the vast majority of the time where he's actually in a potentially defensive situation, he's usually carrying the 380, the little Ruger LCP 380 that I personally cannot hit the broadside of a barn with, and most people that I've seen shoot it don't do a whole lot better. But he has it on him. People who have the Bersa, generally it's a gun that they wind up transitioning away from when it comes to everyday carry. Now, as far as a range gun, well, they usually wind up transferring away from that as well. And the reason why is because, yeah, it's a bulky gun, and so it's not really super convenient for concealed carry, but it's still a fairly small gun, and so at the range it's still not as fun as it could be because it's still pretty small. And so if you want a range gun, you want something that's bigger, something that you have a better sight radius, so it'll be more accurate, something that's going to fit your hand a little bit better, a little bit more size to it, and those kinds of things, just making the manipulations of the different buttons all that much easier. And so the Bersa is kind of in this awkward spot where it's too big to really be a true pocket gun, but it's too small to be a true range gun or even a true field gun. It's just this awkward place in between. And because of that, there are very, 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 very few people that I've known who actually, especially currently, regularly carry a Bersa. Now, there's, like I said, the one friend who wound up getting his for free, basically. He still has to buy ammo for it and those kinds of things. But basically wound up getting the gun for free, and so, yeah, he will carry it from time to time because that's what he's got. And he doesn't have anything else, so it's either this or nothing, so he'll take this. But if he had had his druthers, he probably wouldn't be carrying it. Considering the weight, he'd probably just add on a little bit more weight and get something more powerful, like maybe say a .357 revolver. If you're going to talk about something that you're going to do some kind of open carry system with anyways, you might as well upgrade to something that has a little bit more power. If you wanted to do concealed carry, he might consider this, but he might consider something else as well. If it was a gun that he had bought for himself, I very much doubt that this would have been his first choice. Okay, so what you have here is a difference in philosophy. Basically, the Bersa was designed to be a gun that within its category shot well, and it does. Like I said, it has good sights on it, and it also, because it's a blowback design, it has a fixed barrel, and so it tends to be very accurate, especially for its size. Between the two, between the LCP and the Bersa, I love shooting the Bersa much more. Okay, it is a much better gun to shoot. But it's still not a great gun to shoot. There's lots of guns out there that are better to shoot than a Bersa 380. If you're just looking for a regular shooting gun, take to the range and have fun with, or maybe go to competitions with, Bersa 380 is probably not going to be high on that list. It is better at the range than the LCP is, but when it comes to carry and concealability, the little Ruger usually wins. It's small. Physically, it's small. And it also doesn't weigh very much. Like I said, this is only about 10 ounces unloaded. This one's about 20 ounces unloaded. And you only get 1 or 2 rounds more in the magazine. And so in terms of size and weight efficiency, it's really not. Much better to shoot, yes, but it's not as practical as the Ruger LCP. So as much as I hate the Ruger LCP, for the vast majority of people and the vast majority of circumstances, for what 380s are usually used for, and that is a gun that you carry when you don't want to carry anything else, but you still want to have a gun, the Ruger LCP it fits all the basic parameters, and it does a better job of doing that than the Bersa 380 does. It's smaller, it's lighter, and because of that, people actually wind up carrying it, whereas a lot of people, unless it's basically the only gun they got, they don't wind up carrying the Bersa that much. The Bersa is a great gun, but unfortunately, it just doesn't really fill any particular role all that well. It's not really a great pocket gun. That's also not the best range gun. It's very good for what it is, especially by comparison to the LCP and things like that. But in terms of overall accuracy and handleability, there are better guns that are out there. So it's a good gun, but it just doesn't fill any particular role all that well. And I've talked with lots of people at gun stores and those kinds of things, people behind the counter and people on my side of the counter. And there's lots of people who have experience with these Bersa 380s. Lots of people that do. It's actually a very common gun on the market. And when I talk to them about it, a lot of them have fairly fond memories of it as being one of, or if not their first handgun. Usually their first semi-auto handgun for a lot of these people that I've talked to, or very close to the beginning point, is it was a Bersa 380. And the reason why a lot of times is because it was relatively inexpensive. It had all the conventional controls on it, etc., etc. It was a double single action, so it's a gun that you can operate fairly safely compared to striker-fired guns. It has a lot of safety features built into it, and I've talked about that when I was talking about my Bersa 9mm. I like the Bersa 9mm quite a bit better, but still, it wouldn't be a perfect gun for everyone in every role. Lots of safety features built into it, etc., etc. All those things wind up attracting people to it. You know, it feels fairly good in the hand, especially compared to an LCP. Cost isn't super high. It's still less than $300 a lot of times. decent features, especially decent safety features. Not a whole lot of recoil, especially when you're talking about a 380 round in something that weighs a little bit more, because the Bersa does weigh a little bit more. It's in fact double what the LCP is. Makes it more manageable as far as shooting it is concerned. So for an inexperienced shooter who's new to handguns, doesn't have a ton of money, the Bersa winds up being an option that a lot of them like, and so they get it, they learn on it, and then they fairly quickly transfer away from it. And it's either because it's not really all that small, and so they get something smaller like the Ruger LCP, or they want something that is more capable. They're okay with the size and the weight, but for that size and weight they want to get more out of it. And so they'll go to maybe a double stack 380 or a double stack 9mm or something like that, that gives them more bang for their buck. And this is where I wanted to talk about the Bersa Thunder Plus. Let me see if I can bring that up here. Bersa Thunder Plus, there we go. The Bersa Thunder Plus is typically a more expensive firearm, but it still has decent sights on it. But the main thing that I wanted to point out here was the magazine capacity. The magazine capacity on the Bersa Thunder Plus is 15+1. And the overall size of the gun is, as far as dimensions are concerned, it's virtually the same as the normal Bersa 380. And for some people, that is going to be a big draw. That you can have a gun that isn't overly huge, but you have 15 rounds there, and it's still a fairly good sized gun, fairly heavy gun, and so you're going to get a lot better recoil absorption and those kinds of things. Allow you to put a lot more rounds on target than you're going to get out of an LCP. And so for people that want to have a higher capacity gun, that are worried about maybe fumbling a reload and things like that, or who simply don't want to bother with having to carry a spare magazine, because once you get 15 rounds, your odds of needing that spare magazine go down pretty considerably. It's not impossible that someone with 15 rounds might need to reload. There are occasions where that has happened, but they're fairly rare. And so most people that would have 15 rounds at their disposal wouldn't usually bother to carry a backup magazine. And me, if I was going to run 380, like I said, the whole cost of the round itself is something I can't get past. But if I was to run 380, I would probably go for a Bersa 380 Plus. And the reason why is I want something, for me, that has good recoil absorption, so I want something that's heavier. But I also want to have good bang for my buck, and I don't want to have to worry about reloading and fumbling a reload. So if I were to do that, I'd go for a Bersa 380 Plus for me. But experience tells me that for most people, something that is lighter and smaller is going to serve them better. Me, I carry fairly large handguns all the time. Trying to think, the smallest handgun that I have is my Bersa 9mm, and it's still fairly large even for a so-called compact handgun. It's still pretty good size. It's definitely bigger than a Glock 26. It's relatively close, it's comparable, but it's still bigger than a Glock 26. Certainly weighs more than a Glock 26 does. And those kinds of things. I'm used to carrying fairly large handguns, but most people, when they buy a 380, they're not looking to carry something large. The reason why I would get a 380 is because it has less recoil, and in the Bersa I can still get 15 rounds in there. So I get less recoil and I still have good capacity. That's what I would be looking for. But most people, they want something that's easy to carry, something that they can have on them when they don't have anything else, when they don't want to carry anything else. And so going back to my advice for my friend, the LCP and the Bersa 380 are night and day difference in terms of performance. If you're talking about what they're going to do in terms of mechanical performance on a target, and what they're going to do in your hand and manipulation and those kinds of things, the Bersa is going to win out. It's a bigger gun. It's going to be easier to manipulate. It's a heavier gun, better recoil absorption. Even in the stock version, which holds 7 or 8 rounds, it's still more than the LCP. Has a longer barrel, which means that the rounds, not that 380 is overly powerful, but it means that those rounds are going to be more effective. Typically, longer barrels equate to greater ballistic performance. And so, in terms of being able to engage a target, and do something to the target, the Bersa is going to be better. But, like I said, on a practical level, the LCP is what serves most people the best. Is it going to be as effective on target as the Bersa? No. Like I said, it is a night and day difference, and especially for me. Like I said, the Ruger, I really don't feel confident past about 5 yards with it. You could stretch it to 7, maybe 10. But not super easily for sure. Now you might be able to do something with the sights, and maybe the Ruger LCP2 has some better sights on it, or at least sights that you can trade out. Something, hopefully. But overall is not what I would consider a great target gun by any stretch of the imagination. Not that the Bersa is a fantastic target gun, but it is easily quite a bit ahead of the LCP. So in terms of performance as to what you're going to do to a target, the Bersa 380 is easily better. But in terms of having it on you when you don't have anything else on you, the Ruger LCP wins the day. And for most people, that's what's going to matter most. Like I said, a lot of the people that I talk to who are carrying, and I ask them what they carry, what they are currently carrying, the LCP shows up pretty often. The Bersa, like I said, I've known people who have carried the Bersa in the past, but as far as people that I currently know right now, and especially who carry it concealed, I don't know anyone who carries it concealed. There's the one friend that I have who has a Bersa because it was free and that's what he has, and he didn't have enough spare money to buy a handgun of his own choosing, and so you get what you get, and that's what he wound up with. He carries it, but he usually doesn't carry it concealed. He carries it, but pretty much everybody else that I know who carries a 380 carries something at least like the Ruger LCP. Smaller, lighter, you have it on you when you need it. And so, getting back to the recommendation for my friend, I would say that you're probably going to be better served by the Ruger LCP just because you are more likely to have it on you. For that reason and that reason alone, because in terms of any other practical consideration, how the trigger pull is, how well the sights work or don't work, etc., how good it feels in the hand, pretty much any other metric you look at, the Ruger LCP is bad. But in terms of likelihood of having it on you, it's pretty good, just because it's so small and light. And for a concealed carry handgun, that's usually the overwhelming consideration. I personally would never carry one, ever. I would do the Bersa Plus way before I ever did a Ruger LCP. Much better magazine capacity with the Bersa Plus. It's going to be a heavier gun, which I like. Pretty much all of my guns are fairly heavy. And it is a bigger gun, which I carry. And I'm used to carrying fairly large guns all the time. That doesn't bother me. So if I were to go the 380 route, that's what I would do. But for most people, they're not interested in having super high capacity. They just want something that's going to be on them if they need it. And the LCP will do that. It fills pretty much every other category. And it does have, at least from what I've experienced with the people that I know, it does have a longer break-in period. Like I said, pretty much every single metric you could look at, the LCP is a loser, except that it's small and light. And that alone is usually the deciding factor. you will have it on you when you don't have anything else on you. You want to run into town to grab something real quick, and you don't want to waste time putting on all the garb for the full-size handgun and all that. This is something that's really easy to take and stuff in a pocket. Really easy to stow and go. And because of that, that would personally be my recommendation. If you're going to do the 380 thing, do the Ruger LCP. The people that I know who have Ruger LCPs actually do carry them fairly regularly. The people that I know who own or have owned Bersa 380s, they either carry them because that's what they have, or they have since transitioned to something else. It's just the way that it is. Okay, it's not a bad gun, but for what most people buy them for, concealed carry, convenient carry, the LCP just does a better job. And if you're buying it for another reason, so that you can have a full functioning gun that's going to give you a much higher hit probability, whatever, there are other guns that could probably give you a better hit probability, better ballistic performance, etc., etc. So yeah, it's not really the best of any world. Alright, so that's my analysis of the Ruger LCP versus the Bersa 380. Both of them are good guns in particular aspects. The Ruger LCP is a really great gun at being small and lightweight. The Bersa 380, by comparison, is better at shooting. You are much more likely to hit your target with a Bersa 380. But as far as being small and lightweight, it's not really small and lightweight. Like I said, in terms of performance, they're worlds apart, but in the area that matters most for this particular purpose of use, actually carrying it and having it on you, LCP just simply does better. Alright, I've beat the horse like 1,000 times, which means that this movie probably needs to end. This video recording, sorry, not movie, needs to end, so I'll go ahead and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for all of your guys' time and attention. And if you happen to be a Bersa fan and you hate that I decried it, please do bear in mind that I actually do own a Bersa 9mm. I'm not against Bersas at all, but it's just one of the things of recognizing, what my friend who originally asked me about this was originally interested in. He was interested in having a gun that he can conceal carry on him and have on him when he didn't have anything else, and the Ruger LCP just does better at that. That's like the only thing that it's better at, but it does better at that. And for those of you who think that I've been overly harsh to the Ruger LCP because I don't like the sights and I don't like the trigger and I don't like that it doesn't have last shot hold open, etc., 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 get over it. Okay, it's not good in those areas, but it is good at what it is supposed to do, and that's be a small and lightweight gun that you'll have on you when you don't have anything else. Okay, it was trying to fill a different niche, and frankly it filled the niche better than the Bersa did. So no, I'm not being overly harsh on Ruger, I'm just being realistic about what it is. Terrible gun as far as performance on a given target. Great gun as far as being able to carry it around easily. It is what it is. Alright, bye bye folks.